Power of public opinion. In an effort to outlaw the Ku Klux Klan, Edwin Willis, chairman of the Committee on Un-American Activities, has introduced a bill that could be construed to outlaw the Masons, the Knights of Columbus, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Shriners, or any publication or organization which tries to protect its subscribers or members by refusing to publish subscription and membership lists. Such laws transferring to the federal government police power constitutionally reserved to local and state governments are very dangerous. The bill may pass if the power of public opinion does not stop it. The power of public opinion has slowed down the Johnson juggernaut in 1966 and will accomplish even more in this election year if constitutionalists will keep the congressional mailbags full. That is a summary of my report on the power of public opinion. The full report after a message from my sponsor. On June 14, 1966, Edwin Willis, chairman of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, introduced the Organizational Conspiracies Act to outlaw certain clandestine organizations. The bill is aimed primarily at the Ku Klux Klan, though it does not name the Klan or any other organization. Some of the bombings, burnings, assaults, and murders in the South seem to have been committed by members of civil rights organizations and blamed on the Klan or on white rednecks for the purpose of giving racial agitators a cause célèbre to stimulate money-raising and recruiting. Yet it is apparent that ugly crimes of violence have been committed by members of the Klan. Nonetheless, all crimes attributed to Klansmen are wholly within the jurisdiction of local and state courts and law enforcement. State laws are fully adequate for punishing these crimes. It is insulting to imply that federal law enforcers would do the job better than local and state agencies. Above all, laws transferring to the federal government police power constitutionally reserved to local and state governments are extremely dangerous. The National Motor Vehicle Theft Act, passed in 1919, and the White Slave Traffic Act, passed in 1910, giving the FBI jurisdiction to investigate car thefts and prostitution involving the crossing of state lines, are two examples of many federal laws expanding federal police power beyond what is authorized by the Constitution. In support of the Civil Rights Revolution during recent years, Congress, the President, and the courts have approved a frightful amount of unconstitutional federal encroachment upon local police authority. The Willis bill to outlaw the Ku Klux Klan is among the most outrageous police state measures yet proposed to Congress. This bill, badly drawn, with vague grants of power that could mean anything the reigning bureaucracy wants it to mean, could outlaw the Masons, the Knights of Columbus, the Shriners. Publications like my report, which refuse to make public their subscription lists because they do not want their subscribers harassed and panhandled, could be prosecuted under the proposed Willis bill. And so could organizations like the Daughters of the American Revolution, which try to protect their members by refusing to publish membership lists. Provision in the bill against intimidation of persons could be construed as authority for federal prosecution against, for example, anyone who criticized racial agitators like Martin Luther King or James Meredith, on the presumption that criticism intimidates King and Meredith or makes them afraid to do or say what they please. The Willis bill could also be construed to outlaw the Communist Party, all communist fronts, and vicious racial agitation organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Martin Luther King Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Congress of Racial Equality, NAACP. It is not aimed at communist and pro-communist groups and probably would not be used against them. But even if it were used against organizations which constitutionalists consider bad, it is still unconstitutional police state legislation which all Americans ought to oppose vehemently. The Johnson administration is supporting the Willis bill. It may pass unless there is a storm of protest from people throughout the land. I suggest you write 3 letters on this bill, one to each U.S. senator from your state and one to the U.S. representative from your congressional district. Address the senators at the Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C., the representative at the House Office Building. If you don't know their names, you can get them by calling a local newspaper or library. In your own words, say something like this: The Organizational Conspiracies Act of 1966, now pending in the House Committee on Un-American Activities, would be another gigantic step toward a federal police state. There is no need for the bill, it is wholly unconstitutional, and it could be used to destroy not just the Ku Klux Klan, but freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and many of the most respected and respectable organizations in the United States. If you can exert any influence to help kill this bill in committee, I implore you to exert it. If the bill in any form is reported out of committee, I urge you to help defeat it. Last year, 1965, Congress behaved like a mindless, unprincipled political caucus, assembled for the sole purpose of rubber stamping whatever Lyndon Johnson proposed. In that 1 year, Johnson pushed through Congress more harmful, socialistic, unconstitutional legislation than had ever been enacted in any previous 10-year period. In 1966, the Johnson juggernaut has been slowed down. All U.S. representatives and 1/3 of all senators must face the people and ask for their votes this year. And it is evident that many now fear the political wrath of the voting public for their senseless support of Great Society programs. Fear it even more than they fear Johnson's famed arm twisting. Johnson's arm twisting is really nothing but bribery of senators and representatives with taxpayers' money. For supporting presidential programs, members of Congress are promised federal spending in their states and districts and administration support for bills or committee assignments they want. For resisting, they are threatened with administration opposition to their own vote-buying schemes. This year, Johnson's arm twisting for consensus is not yielding the results it did last year. By the end of the first week in July 1965, for example, most of Johnson's major programs had already sailed through Congress with big majorities of both houses fatuously hanging on to the president's coattails. At the end of the first week in July 1966, most of Johnson's major legislative proposals were still pending, many of them not yet out of committee, some not even scheduled for hearings. Congress, presently composed of political weather vanes largely, who do not respect their solemn vows to uphold the Constitution of the United States, but follow only the dictates of political expediency, is now finding it politically expedient to resist Johnson's demands and to make some pretense of listening to the public. How do members of Congress know what the public wants? By the letters you write them. Every time I suggest letters to Congress, Congress does get sacks of mail, and I get some too, from people who say such letter writing does no good, but it does. For proof, look briefly at the record. On January 12, 1966, Johnson demanded an International Education Act, an International Health Act, an International Agricultural Program, and an International Birth Control Program, all of which would increase the unconstitutional tax burden on Americans for educating, medicating, feeding, and otherwise uplifting the world. At present, Congress does not seem disposed to act on any of these 4 Johnson proposals. On January 26, 1966, Johnson demanded the Demonstration Cities Act to start a remodeling of every town and city in the United States, a program which would put the federal bureaucracy in control of every aspect of human life in the cities of America. Both Senate and House have completed committee hearings on this legislation, but neither has put it to a vote for passage yet. As a companion piece to his Demonstration Cities program, the President asked for a Community Development District Act, which would give federal bureaucrats authority to plan and direct life in the rural areas of America. It does not now appear that the present Congress will act on this proposal. This year, the President asked for an Agricultural Stockpile Act, which would grant the Secretary of Agriculture autocratic power to control production, storage, and sale of farm commodities under the pretext of acquiring and maintaining reserves of commodities that may be needed in an emergency. Legislation to give the President what he asked was introduced, but then killed in committee. Johnson has asked Congress to create a Department of Transportation, which would be another step toward absolute federal control over the transportation industry. Both houses have completed hearings on this legislation to create the new department, but neither has yet put it to a vote, though earlier this year it seemed certain that the President's demand would be promptly met. The present federal state unemployment compensation program has enabled federal agencies to exert dictatorial powers over state governments. Administration-supported legislation now pending would give the federal bureaucracy complete control, would invite a proliferation of fraudulent claims for compensation, would encourage idleness at taxpayers' expense by extending the period of benefits and the amount. This legislation is still in committee and has not reached the floor of the House for a vote, although earlier it seemed certain to pass. Now, there is more than one reason why these bills and many others, which seemed so certain of passage earlier in the year, are now either bottled up in committee or withheld from final action in the House and Senate. One reason, and I think the most powerful reason, is the fact that the bills were called to the attention of the public, and the public, by writing letters to Congress, registered strong opposition. I suggest that you help keep the congressional mailbags full. If public opposition to Johnson's legislative program continues and grows, Congress will listen more this year at least than in other years, because this is an election year. To keep yourselves informed about what Washington is doing or trying to do, I suggest that you subscribe to the Dan Smoot Report, on which these broadcasts are based. The weekly magazine costs $10 a year, 52 issues a year, or a trial subscription of 3 months for $3. For the subscription, send the money to me, $3 for a 3-month trial subscription to the Dan Smoot Report. Send it to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas. For the printed report on which this broadcast is based, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 568, The Power of Public Opinion. 10 copies, $1. This is Dan Smoot. Goodbye. God bless you.